Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Let us look at the definition or the description of the velocity gradient. So consider a point in space and the velocity vector is u, essentially which is u v w at a given point. In the neighborhood of u, let us consider a point, say u plus du. Now let us try to relate the velocity at this particular point in terms of this. So let this point be x and this point be x plus dx, where obviously x is x, y, z, or for convenience we'll call it x1, x2, x3. In fact, we've written the velocity vector as u v w, but we could have written it as u1 v1 u1 u2 u3, and this will help us to formulate everything in terms of the index notation. Let us focus on the u1 component. So u1 at this particular point may be expanded in a Taylor series as u1 at x. Now u1 is a function of x1, x2, x3, so we can write plus del u1 del x1 dx1 plus del u2 del x2 dx2 plus del u3 del x3 dx3, and therefore the relative velocity, that is u1 at x plus dx minus u1 at x, is written as del u1 del x1 dx1 plus del u2 del x2 dx2 plus del u3 del x3 dx3. Now let me just take these expressions, let me just write it over here. So these three can be summarized in the following manner. So these are essentially du1, du2 and du3, because we have written it in this particular format. So dui is equal to del ui del xj dxj, where the repeated index is j and let me just reiterate, if we have a repeated index, then this particular statement is equivalent to writing summation del ui del xj dxj j summed from 1 to 3, and you can easily verify this statement with the help of these particular equations. The important thing is we are using the Einstein summation notation, and we have covered this in an earlier lecture. That lecture was primarily the mathematical preliminaries. So the summation is implied, and this is called as the velocity gradient tensor. Rather, not this, but this particular term is called as the velocity gradient tensor. So this is the velocity gradient tensor, and the various components. So del u1 del x1 del u2 del x1 del u3 del x1, and similarly this component, so last component will be del u3 del x3. Okay, I'll let you fill the other components. So this particular tensor is called as the velocity gradient tensor. In symbolic form it is called as grad v. So this is not the gradient of a vector. So I mean this V is actually this. So it's actually a tensor, and this is equal to del xi of uj. Okay, so the ij component of this particular tensor is this, and this is what we have written. So this is called as the velocity gradient tensor, and let us write this tensor in a symmetric and antisymmetric representation. So del ui del xj can be written as half del ui del xj plus del uj del xi plus half del ui del xj minus del uj del xi. We have just split it into a symmetric and an antisymmetric part, and this particular part is called as Sij, and this is written as half Rij. And the convention of not absorbing half into this Rij definition is completely a matter of convention. It has nothing to do with the physics. Okay, so S is called as the rate of strain tensor, and Rij is called as the rotation tensor. And there's a reason for calling these as rate of strain tensor and a rotation tensor, and it will be clear in what follows. However, for now, it is more important for us to recognize that this particular decomposition of the velocity gradient tensor is quite important. So first of all, a gradient of velocity is quite important in fluid mechanics, because a gradient in velocity is what distinguishes the deformation of elements as opposed to solid body motion. So if there is no gradient in velocity, it's almost like a solid body which is moving. So the deformation, the velocity gradient tensor sort of encompasses the information about deformation. But more generally, it is the symmetric part of the velocity gradient tensor that encompasses that particular information about deformation. We'll see the derivation later on. And the breakage into symmetric and antisymmetric is important because in dynamics, in fluid dynamics, the antisymmetric part would not play a role in the determination of stress, because the antisymmetric part is associated with fluid rotation, and fluid rotation, if this is a fluid element, simply rotation of this element does not partake in generation of forces in the fluid. It is the deformation, and deformation is associated with the symmetric part, and hence the constitutive relationship, that is the relationship between the stress and the strain, is formed between the stress and the symmetric part of the velocity gradient tensor, that is the rate of strain tensor. It cannot be there, we cannot have a constitutive relationship between stress and the rotation tensor, because it will not map stress to deformations. It will only involve rotations which do not give rise to stress. Let us turn our attention on the first term of this rate of strain tensor, that is S11. So S11 is basically half del U1 del X1 plus del U1 del X1. Basically we substitute I equal to 1 and J equal to 1, and this is equal to del U1 del X1. Now del U1 del X1 is like the gradient. Well, it's not like the gradient, it is exactly the gradient of the u velocity in the x direction. So if I call this as the x direction, right? So if the velocity over here is u, then the velocity over here will be u. So if this is the velocity at point x, this will be the u velocity at point u plus delta x, if I call this as delta x. And so the velocity at u plus delta x can be written as u at x plus del u del x delta x and higher order terms. Basically, higher order terms are order delta x square and above. So the relative velocity of point B with respect to A is going to be ux plus del u, this particular term, which is the velocity at point B expressed in terms of a Taylor series expansion, minus u at x. So this is the relative velocity, and so this ux gets cancelled, and the relative velocity is del u del x delta x. Alright, so as a consequence of the fact that the velocity at point B is higher than the velocity at point A, well, higher in the sense that the sign convention we assume that del u del x is positive. I mean, it can be negative, in which case the velocity at point B will be lower than the velocity at point A. But under the present sign convention, if this is A and this is B, and if after a time delta t, point A will move to this location over here, so point B will move over a larger distance than point A. So it will move like this, and that will result in a linear increase in the original length. So A prime B prime will be delta x plus something. It will be larger than delta x. So the physical idea should be clear that because of the fact that point B has a higher velocity than point A, point B prime will travel more than the distance A prime would have traveled, and that will lead to a linear stretching of the element. So physically we understand that S11 is responsible for linear elongation in the one direction, that is the x direction. Now similarly, let us turn our attention to S22. So S22 is fundamentally half del u2 del x2 plus del u2 del x2, and this is basically del u2 del x2. So it is the gradient of the y velocity in the y direction. So if the velocity over here is u2 or v, then the velocity over here will be, so if this is the location y, this will be u2 at y plus delta y, and this can be written as u2 at y plus del u2 del y times delta y, if I call the length of the element as delta y, plus higher order terms. And well, I'm writing it as y, but effectively it is x2 also. These are equivalent. There should be no doubt in this. It's just the convention. So the relative velocity of point B with respect to A, okay, so velocity of B minus, rather, velocity of B minus velocity of A, also u2 at B minus u2 at A, this is the same because the V velocity is the same as u2. This will be equal to this particular expression minus u2 at y. So this particular term will get cancelled. This will be del u2 del x2 times delta x2. So essentially point B would move further than point A, leading to a elongation in the y direction. Okay, the element would elongate in the y direction. So after a delta t, if point A moves this distance, point B would move a distance larger than this. Okay, and so the length of the element in the y direction would increase. So del u2 del x2, essentially S22, is the rate of elongation in the y direction, and the observant viewer may recognize where we are getting at. Essentially we are getting at the rate of strain meaning the rate of increase in length per unit length. But before that, let us look at this small animation. In this animation we have the linear elongation in the x direction, and I hope this computer generated animation would remove any doubts that you may have.
Let us now derive the rate of linear elongation in one direction. Consider an element as shown oriented along the x1 direction whose length is delta x1. The velocity on the left end is delta u1 while the velocity on the other end is u1 plus del u1 del x1 times delta x1 plus del 2 u1 del x1 2 plus delta x1 square upon 2 factorial. So after a time delta t, the left end has traveled a distance u1 times delta t, while the right end has traveled a distance equal to u1 plus del u1 del x1 times delta t delta x1 plus the higher order term, this entire thing multiplied by delta t. If I call a and b as the 2 points of the initial element and a prime b prime as the points after a time delta t, then I can define the relative rate of change of the length AB as 1 upon LB, 1 upon LAB times DLAB times upon DT. So 1 upon LAB, capital D LAB dt is the Lagrangian change of the length, and it is the same as the Eulerian change as delta t goes to 0. So the difference in length will be a prime b prime minus ab upon ab, that is the relative change in length, and there will be another delta t because we are taking the rate of change, and we will take the limit delta t going to 0, and this is equal to a prime a minus b prime b upon ab upon delta t. Now we can recognize u1 delta t as a prime a, and this entire term u1 delta t plus del u1 del x1 delta x1 times delta t plus the higher order terms is times delta t as the distance b prime b, and of course ab is equal to delta x1, and we will take the limit delta t tends to 0. Now the first term u1 delta t cancels out, and we can simplify this to limit delta t goes to 0, 1 upon delta x1 delta t times delta u1 delta x1 times delta x1 times delta t plus higher order terms. We can cancel delta x1 delta t from the first term, and all the other terms are functions of delta x1 and so on. In the limit of infinitesimal element and delta t goes to 0, all the higher order terms cancel, and essentially we are left with delta u1 del u1 del x1, and this is the relative rate of change of the element AB in the x1 direction. Now by the same logic, in the x2 and in the x3 directions, we will have expressions del u2 del x2 and del u3 del x3. That is, the relative rate of elongation of an element in the x1 direction will be del u1 del x1, in the x2 direction it will be del u2 del x2, and in the x3 direction it will be del u3 del x3.
Now we can use the above uh, formulae to find out how the rate of change of volume happens. So this is the relative change of volume over time. So let us consider a small volume. So the initial volume is comprised of delta x, delta y, and delta z. So if it is subjected to linear stretching in all the orthogonal directions, then the initial length, which are delta x, delta y, delta z, they will stretch to delta x plus delta x times delta t times del u1 del x1 plus order delta x square. So this will be one term y will change to delta y plus delta y delta t del u2 del x2 plus order delta mixed up terminologies, but delta y is the same as delta x2 plus order delta x2 square, while delta z will become delta x3 plus delta x3 delta t del u2 del x3 plus order delta x3 square. So now the initial volume was the product of this, essentially delta x, delta y, delta z, and it is the same as delta x1, delta x2, delta x3, and the final volume is going to be, so let us take delta x1 common from this, so it will be delta x1 multiplied by 1 plus delta t times del u1 del x1 plus order delta x1 times delta x2 1 plus delta t del u2 del x2 plus order delta x2 times delta x3 1 plus delta t del u3 del x3 plus order delta x3. So if you multiply all this, so uh, this term remain as they are. So let me start off a little bit over here. So it's delta x1, delta x2, delta x3. Now 1 multiplied by, so see, let us take a look at it. It's gonna be 1 multiplied by this term multiplied by this term. So if you just look at it, it will be 1 plus delta t times del u1 del x1 plus del u2 del x2 plus del u3 del x3 plus order delta x2 delta x1 delta x3, then there will be higher order terms, so order delta t delta x1 and so on. You just need to do all the multiplications carefully. The important fact is you will obtain a combination of terms which will look like this. So essentially, if I call this as delta v0, this will be delta v0. Now if we multiply delta v0 with essentially this term, take it inside, so it's delta v0 plus delta v0 times delta t times del u1 del x1 plus del u2 del x2 plus del u3 del x3 plus this order, so it will be delta v naught multiplied by these various higher order terms. So now we have the change in volume is equal to delta v final minus delta v initial, or rate of change of volume will be this upon delta t with the appropriate limit delta t goes to 0. So delta v final is this entire sum, this minus delta v naught, so this particular term is subtracted, so this term vanishes. It will be delta v naught delta t del u1 del x1 plus del u2 del x2 plus del u3 del x3 upon delta t, and of course the higher order terms are there. This delta t cancels out, and so this is d delta v by dt, and if I take this delta v on the left hand side, so I obtain this. And so essentially it is the relative rate of change of volume, and it is equal to del u1 del x1 plus del u2 del x2 plus del u3 del x3, and all
the higher order terms will also vanish because we are taking an infinitesimally small element. So essentially we obtain the rate of change of volume is equal to this. The physical meaning is clear. If the x increases, so if this is one volume, this is the one direction, this is the two direction, this is the three direction. So if the volume increases in the one direction and say the volume increases in the three direction, meaning it becomes something like this. Okay, so the length has increased in the one direction and in the three direction, meaning del u1 del x1 is positive, del u3 del x3 is also positive. If the volume of the initial element is to remain fixed, then the volume has to shrink in the lateral direction. This is very much similar to shrinking of a solid element, which is quantified in terms of the Poisson ratio. Okay, the lateral strain because of the longitudinal strain. So if these are greater than 0 and if the volume is constant, this entire term will vanish. That is, the volume will not change. The volume will be constant over time. Therefore, del u1 del x1 plus del u2 del x2 plus del u3 del x3 has to be 0. And if these two terms are positive, then del u2 del x2 necessarily has to be negative. Meaning, if we have elongation in the 1 and 3 directions, we must have del u2 del x2 less than 0, meaning a contraction in the 2 direction. And that contraction is not arbitrary, but rather it happens in such a way that the volume remains fixed. And this essentially is the divergence of the velocity vector. And if the volume is constant, it will be equal to 0. If the volume is not constant, it will not be equal to 0. And this entire thing in a summation form can be written as summation I equal to 1 to 3 del ui del xi, and because I is a repeated index, we can use the Einstein summation formula to simply write it as del ui del xi. Therefore, the rate of change of the volume, the relative rate of change of the volume is equal to the divergence of the velocity. Equivalently, it is equal to del ui del xi. And the observer may also note that del ui del xi is essentially del u1 del x1 plus del u2 del x2 plus del u3 del x3, and it is nothing but the trace of S, because the tensor S is del u1 del x1, del u2 del x2, del u3 del x3. The off diagonal components say as 0, it doesn't matter. So the trace of this tensor is going to be this string, and if we write it in index notation, it will be del ui del xi. Therefore, the volumetric strain rate or the bulk strain rate, it's also called as the bulk strain rate, is equal to the divergence of the velocity vector. And you may recall from first year mathematics that the trace of a matrix is also its invariant, meaning that this entire thing, the summation of these three terms, would be independent of the coordinate system. And it should be obvious that if a flow is deforming an imaginary element, the volume of the imaginary element should remain conserved regardless of the coordinate system. This rate of change of volume cannot depend on the coordinate system. If it were to happen, it would result in a physical inconsistency, in the sense that you will have one coordinate system which allows for change of volume and another coordinate system which does not allow for the rate of change of volume, and that cannot happen. Now that we've looked at what the gradient of one velocity so far we have looked at how the gradient of one component of velocity in its own direction manifests. So basically, if we have of an element like this, and if there is a gradient in the velocity, meaning this velocity is smaller than this velocity, and the length of the element is oriented along that gradient in velocity, then the length of the element changes. So that's a linear elongation, and this comprises of elements such as del u1 del x1, del u2 del x2, and del u3 del x3. So now what about the presence of gradients in the orthogonal direction? Consider a cube like this. What will happen if the gradient in the u velocity is over the x2 direction, meaning, so this is the y direction and this is the x direction, or more generally this is the e2 direction or x2 direction, and this is the x1 direction, right? So what happens if we have a gradient in the x2 direction? So this is u1 at x, and this is u1 at x2 plus delta x2. So this distance is delta x2. So the fact that this velocity is larger than this will lead to such kind of a structure. I mean, if we consider the relative velocity of this point with respect to this, then it will have some kind of deformation. Similarly, if the velocity over here is u2 at x1, the velocity over here is u2 at x1 plus delta x1, where delta x1 is this distance, it will lead to a relative movement of this point in this direction relative to this. So it will lead to something like this. So it leads to the deformation of an element. So the cross derivatives gives rise to deformation of elements. Let us try to look at one particular simulation where the velocity has such a gradient. That is, for that particular cube, this velocity will have a gradient with respect to this point in this direction. This velocity, the velocity at this point, will have a gradient with respect to this direction. Now, because the velocity also is non-zero at this point, it will lead to a movement of the entire cube. At the same time, it will lead to a deformation. Okay, so now let us look at how we can mathematically describe such a phenomenon. So let us consider this cube. The velocity over here is u1, over here is u2, over here it will be, so if this distance is delta x1, I can directly write the velocity in terms of Taylor series expansion. So it will be u2 plus del u2 del x1 delta x1, and there will be higher order terms over here as well. Similarly, the velocity at this point will be u1 plus del u1 del x2 delta x2 and higher order terms. Now, because of these velocities and these velocities, so first of all we note that the cube will move. So let me draw an exaggerated figure, something like this. So forget about this direction for now. Okay, so let me draw the original direction as well. So this is the original shape. Now if I call this point A has moved to point A prime because it has a u velocity causing it to move in this direction, while at the same time it has a u2 velocity as well causing it to move in this direction, and hence point A moves all the way to A prime. Now if I call this point B, because of the gradient in velocity, point B is not over here but rather it shifts to this direction. So this is now B prime. If I call this C, so this will be C prime. Now over a time delta t, the displacement of point A in this direction, so this particular distance, this will be u1 delta t. The displacement of point B in this direction will be the velocity of point B times delta t. So this will be u1 plus del u1 del x2 delta x2 multiplied by delta t. So now this particular distance, let me call this B. So B prime is going to be B original B prime minus B original B. Now B original B is the same as u1 delta t, right? So B0 B prime is this distance that we have just evaluated. So it will be u1 plus del u1 del x2 delta x2 times delta t minus this distance, which is essentially u1 delta t. So bb prime is equal to, so this u1 delta t cancels out, del u1 del x2 delta x2 delta t. Now what is AB? It's equal to delta x2. So I can write this angle as delta alpha. So tan of delta alpha is going to be bb prime divided by a prime b. But a prime b is the same as ab original, because there is no velocity component which is different at b0 and a. The y velocity at b0 and a is the same. We are considering gradients in the cross direction. So in the orthogonal direction x2, we have a gradient in the x velocity, but the y velocity is same, and if the y velocity at a and b0 is the same, it will not lead to an extension of a b0, and thus a b0 and a prime b will have the same length, and thus a prime b will also be equal to delta x2. So this will be delta u1 by delta x2 times delta x2 delta t divided by delta x2. This delta x2 cancels out, and for small deformations tan delta alpha will be equal to delta alpha. We can take this delta t over here on the left hand side, and this becomes equal to delta u1 del u1 del x2. We can take a limit, delta t tends to 0, and under this limit we have delta alpha by delta t, that will become del alpha, like d alpha upon dt. So that is effectively the rate of change of this angle. So this is the rate of change of vertical angle. Okay, let us now look at this particular angle. Let me call this angle as delta beta. This original point let me call as C, and let me call this as C original. Okay, so this distance is the distance traveled by C original to C, and that is because of this particular velocity. Hence this particular length will be equal to u2 plus del u2 del x1 delta x1 times delta t. Whereas this distance is going to be the same because C0 is like the original point. So this is like the original point. So they are at the same level. Alright. So A prime, this particular distance will be the distance moved by point A to A prime, and that will be U2 times delta t. So this will be U2 times delta t. So C prime C, this particular distance is going to be this distance minus this distance. So C prime C is equal to U2 plus del U2 by del x1 times delta x1, this entire term times delta t minus U2 times delta t. And this U2 delta t cancels out, and we have del U2 del x1 delta x1 delta t. Now we can write tan of delta beta is equal to C prime C, which is this distance. So let's just write it at C prime C divided by A prime C. Now A prime C is the same as delta x1 because A prime and A, C original and C do not have a different velocity. They literally have the same x velocity, and hence there is no relative movement in the x direction of points A and points C0. They only have a difference in the y velocity causing it to move up, but this distance in the x direction will not change. Okay, therefore A prime C is also going to be delta x1 because we are essentially considering gradients in the orthogonal direction, and this is going to be del u2 del x1 delta x1 times delta t, and A prime C is equal to delta x1, so we will divide by delta x1 and delta x1 cancels out, x1 cancels out, and this becomes del u2 del x1 times delta t. In the limit for small deformation, tan delta beta is the same as delta beta, and we can take the delta t over on this side and take a limit delta t goes to 0, that is the limit of small deformation, and we have del u2 del x1. So essentially d beta dt is equal to del u2 del x1. So given a cube like this, we know that after deformation this particular angle d alpha dt, this particular angle d beta dt. So d alpha dt was found out to be del u1 del x2. The average rate at which the elements which are 90 degree try to rotate towards themselves is half d alpha dt plus d beta dt, and this is half del u1 del x2 plus del u2 del x1. So this is the rate at which they converge towards each other. So the rate at which the perpendicular element converges in the 1-2 plane is half del u1 del x2 plus del u2 del x1, and you can of course extend this to the rate at which the perpendicular element converges in the ij plane will be half del ui del xj plus del uj del xi. Now on the contrary, we can also try to find out the net angular velocity, the angular rotation rate of this element. Now the sign convention is counterclockwise is positive velocity and clockwise is negative velocity, and these rates of change of angle are as per the sign convention of as y increases velocity increases, as y increases velocity as x increases velocity increases, and therefore the average rotation rate, it will be half. So this rotation rate is positive, so d beta dt minus d alpha dt, because this is trying to rotate in the clockwise direction, and this will essentially give us half del u2 del x1 minus del u1 del x2. So these are the two important results. So now consider the fact that del u2 del x1 is some value a and del u1 del x2 is some value minus a, meaning u as x2 increases, u1 reduces. The velocity at this point, if it is u1, the velocity at this point will be something less. So because the relative velocity of this point with respect to this point, it will be this velocity, small velocity minus the large velocity. So it will have some net velocity in this direction. So instead of the element trying to rotate like this, it will try to rotate like this. And if both are equal, so this would be half a minus of minus a. So this would be half times 2a, and this will become a, meaning the element is simply rotating with some velocity. It's simply rotating with a velocity equal to a. And this can be seen in the simulation as well. In the simulation, we have a v velocity like this and a higher v velocity at this point, meaning del u2 del x1 is positive, but for the u1 velocity we have a lower velocity over here, meaning relative to this point the velocity over here is in this direction. Okay, if I call this b, I call this a, it will be ub minus ua, and ua is larger, so the velocity is negative, so it's in this direction and it's causing it to move like this. So the element simply tries to rotate rather than deform, and the net rotation rate is equal to alpha. The vorticity of a flow is defined as the omega vector. It is the curl of the velocity field. And the curl, so if I want to write it in a Cartesian form, it is ijk del del x1 del del x2 del del x3 u1 u2 u3. So the I component of vorticity is del u3 del x2 minus del u2 del x3. The j component of vorticity is del u1 del x3 minus del u3 del x1, and the k component of vorticity is del u2 del x1 minus del u1 del x2. Now the rotation tensor Rij was defined as half, or rather the half was omitted. It was simply del ui del xj minus del uj del xi. So let us write down all the components. So it is 0, then this component is, so I equal to 1 and j equal to 2. So this becomes del u1 del x2 minus del u2 del x1. This component, so I is 1 and j is equal to 3. So del u1 del x3 minus del u3 del x1. The diagonal components are going to be 0, we all know that. Now this component will be minus of this, because we know that Rij is an antisymmetric matrix, and therefore Rij is minus Rji. It's an antisymmetric matrix. So this term will be del u2 del x1 minus del u1 del x2. Similarly, this particular term will be the negative of this term, and it will be del u3 del x1 minus del u1 del x3. This term will be I equal to 1, j equal to 2, and this term will be rather I equal to 2, j equal to 3. So del u2 del x3 minus del u3 del x2. So this term will be the negative of this, so it will be del u3 del x2 minus del u2 del x3. Now the components of the vorticity, so this particular component is omega 1, this particular component is omega 2, this particular component is omega 3. So the omega vector is essentially omega 1 I plus omega 2 j plus omega 3 k, or effectively we can write it as omega 1 e1 plus omega 2 e2 plus omega 3 e3, and thus this rotation tensor can also be written as 0 0 0. Now look, del omega 1 del u1 del x2 minus del u2 del x1, so this particular term is minus omega 3, so this is minus omega 3. Now this term is del u1 del x3 minus del u3 del x1, and this is equal to omega 2, so this becomes omega 2. Now this is del u2 del x3 minus del u3 del x2, so this is equal to minus omega 1. Similarly, these quantities will be omega 3, this will be minus omega 2, this will be omega 1. So there is a relationship between the vorticity of the flow and the rotation tensor, and it is given by this. A flow is said to be irrotational if the vorticity in the flow is 0, that is the curl of the velocity field is equal to 0. Effectively, it means all the rotation tensor components are also equal to 0. Now we know from vector calculus that if this is true, then u can be represented as the gradient of a scalar, because the curl of a gradient of a scalar is always equal to 0. So if a flow is irrotational, we can represent it in terms of a single scalar also, but more on this in a later lecture. The circulation of a flow is defined as gamma integral of u dot ds along a closed circuit. So if this is a closed circuit in the flow, we will try to evaluate. So if the ds will always be along the curve, so this is ds, and if the u is like this, we will take the component of u along ds and integrate it over the entire curve. And from the Stokes theorem, we know that the contour integral is equal to the curl of the velocity dot n cap times the area. So the contour integral can be converted into an area integral and be written in terms of the curl of the velocity, and the curl of the velocity we know is the vorticity. So this becomes integral vorticity dot n cap dA integrated over the entire area enclosed by the closed contour. Is there a relationship between Rij and omega? And we saw that there is. So let us write down. R12 was found out to be minus omega 3. R12 was found out to be minus omega 3. R13 was found out to be omega 2. R21 was found out to be omega 3. R23 was found out to be minus omega 1. R31 was found out to be minus omega 2, and R32 was found out to be omega 1. And just to refresh everyone's memory, I'm gonna copy this over here. So this was the components. So these are the components of the R matrix written in terms of omega. So what is the relationship between R, I, K and omega? Now look, we need to have an alternating negative sign, and Ij must map to K. and the only way that is possible is Rij is equal to minus epsilon ijk omega k. Now we can verify this. Let us put I equal to 1, j equal to 2. So this becomes minus 1, 2, k omega k. Now epsilon is the alternating tensor, and we know that epsilon ijk is equal to 1 when ijk are cyclic. It is equal to 0 when any index repeats. It is equal to minus 1 when ijk is anticyclic. So 1, 2, 3. So k can only be equal to 3, because if k is equal to 1 or 2, then k will repeat and it will be 0. Now k can be only 3, so this becomes minus epsilon 1, 2, 3 omega 3. Epsilon 1, 2, 3 is cyclic, and this becomes 1, so this is minus 1 times omega 3, and thus R12 is equal to minus omega 3. And you can put various values of I and j, and you can use the properties of the alternating tensor to verify this relationship to be true. So there is a relationship between Rij and omega k, and it is through the alternating tensor. Therefore, what we had originally written, the du was essentially del ui del xj dxj, and we had written this velocity gradient tensor in the form del ui del xj plus del uj del xi, half of this plus half of del ui del xj minus del uj del xi, and this entire thing dot dxj. So this is Sij dxj plus half Rij dxj, and Rij we've just obtained is minus epsilon ijk omega k. So this becomes Sij dxj plus half, so this becomes minus, so epsilon ijk omega k dxj. Now a cross product between two vectors a cross b, so the kth component of this is epsilon ijk ai bj. So epsilon ijk omega k dxj is equal to Sij dxj minus half, or rather minus half dx cross omega its I component, and this is equal to Sij dxj plus half omega cross dx, the ith component of this. So it is nothing but the difference in velocity, the ith component in the difference in velocity is equal to the deformation tensor times the distance between the two particles plus half omega cross dx, its I component. So if I put du1, I just put s1 j dxj plus half omega cross dx, this vector's I1 component, and this by Einstein summation notation will be s12 rather s11 dx1 plus s12 dx2 plus s13 dx3, and this will be half omega cross dx vector, its first component. So whenever you are given a vorticity field and a strain field, you can find out the difference in velocity between 2 points. So if we have 2 points, we know the dx vector, and the components of the dx vector are dx1, dx2, dx3. The rate of strain tensor has S11, S12, S13, and similarly S21, S22, S23, and all these components. So it's very simple to find out. We summarize the lecture in this slide. We have the linear elongation as del ui del xi. The angular deformation is related to the strain rate tensor. The rotation, average rotation of an element is related to the rotation tensor. The formulae are given on the screen. Goodbye.